You know, the last time I played Spider-Man 2 to get myself reacquainted with how it plays for the review, the strangest thing happened. Okay, so every now and then when you've completed a certain amount of objectives, a new chapter starts. And it gives you a new set of objectives. And whenever it does this, the camera just zooms right in front of Spidey. It's to get this epic, dynamic shot to start the new chapter with, to kick things off. And there was this one time where I didn't realize I was right at the end of a chapter and a new one was about to start. And I was swinging. And I stayed, I lingered on this one swing for so long till it got its peak, and then I was there for a few seconds, and just as I started to go down, while I was still just hanging there at the end of the swing to see how far up I could go before losing momentum, right then a new chapter started. And the camera just went, shwoop, right into Spidey's crutch. Really, it's the space between his ass and his crutch was right there in front of the camera, and that's Spider-Man 2 for you. Two shoutouts are in order this time around, with the bulk of Spider-Man 2's gameplay footage recorded by Yasashi Yuki and Ultimate Spider-Man recorded by Liquid Solidus. In today's retrospective, we're going to be looking at the best Spider-Man game ever. Both of them. Spider-Man 2 and Ultimate Spider-Man. Yeah. First, let's pick up where we left off. So, Sam Raimi released another movie, definitely the best of the old trilogy, maybe even the only good one, and game developers felt it was time for another Spider-Man game. Okay, so obviously it's gonna play just like every other 3D Spider-Man game we've seen so far, where everything is a bottomless pit you want to stay out of, and whoa! Kind of a little closer, aren't you, Spidey? I don't remember getting that close to the ground last time. Oh, well, I'm sure he still explodes or whatever once he touches the... No, seriously, I'm gonna spurge about this and you're gonna like it, so sit down, shut up, and eat your veggies. You guys have to understand, growing up at the time, seeing games like this was a totally new thing. The things you could do in this game were just unheard of. I mean, sure, in Enter Electro, which we're just gonna call Double D from now on, there were some levels that took place almost entirely on the ground, only allowing you onto the rooftops of structures that were no taller than a few stories. But this, being able to nosedive from the Empire State Building, blew my freaking mind, and it just hasn't been the same ever since. Seriously, most fans consider this to be the end-all, be-all Spider-Man game. The Spider-Man game. And sure, it's an amazing game, but I must admit a big part of its garnered reverence is simply due to the initial impression it made on us back in the day, being the first of its kind and all. Most reviews you'll find for just about any Spider-Man game released since then that has even a vaguely similar playstyle is bound to have a mention of Spider-Man 2 in there somewhere. This is the game that people compare other Spider-Man games to see how and if they measure up to it. This is the definitive Spider-Man game. But, well, I didn't get where I am with these reviews by stroking my nostalgia wiener. There aren't enough people out there who know that I didn't grow up with the classic Sonic games. The first one I ever played was Adventure 2 on the GameCube. Anyway, let's talk about Spider-Man 2. Instead of being divided into levels that can be accessed from a stage select screen, the entire game takes place on a lovingly crafted simulation of New York City. For a little while, you're locked in a certain chunk of the city to focus on your training at the hands of the Great One.
Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is jump off the building. I mean it, just jump. Hey, I wouldn't tell you to do something dangerous and life-threatening, would I? Anytime now, that pavement's not getting any softer. Great, you made it.
But once you have the basics done, the entire map is open up to you and you can freely swing all over the place. It's glorious. The story mode lasts 15 chapters. Now, the first few chapters go by really quickly, but don't worry, it takes its time after covering the basics. The actual story, while being chained to that of the movie, does have some original ideas to show a different side of this game, so it's not like you're just watching the movie again. The elements from the movie's plot are handled reasonably well, but do kinda lack the depth of that movie. I mean, let's just face it. But I had more fun chasing Black Cat around and watching the bond between these characters grow, though we'll talk about this some more in a little bit. One thing I really like is that this doesn't feel like a bunch of segmented chunks of a story like last time, now having a narrative with a much better flow. Many times sometimes you'll meet someone like, say, Mysterio, only to see them leave for a little while, and you run into them again later on, giving them more of a lasting presence. And all the loose ends are tied up really fast and really nicely in the game's last few chapters. It feels like one giant story rather than having a list of enemies to beat one at a time before moving to the next, like on a shopping list. It's an interesting approach that I appreciate. Peter also monologues to himself a lot, which some people find unbearable, but I actually like. Keep in mind, I think Tobey Maguire makes a terrible Spider-Man, although he's still decent as Peter. But I still want to see how the dude would piece his life back together after so much character reflection that I honestly didn't find that obnoxious. I understand it's not for everybody, and you may think he's a whiner because you're an unsympathetic git with no patience whatsoever, but whatever. As for cutscenes, well, I honestly like the in-game cutscenes a lot more than the pre-rendered cutscenes. Sure, the graphics still aren't very good, but there's a lot more detail, and the character designs more than make up for the less than stellar animations. I mean, look at this. Doc Ock is pretty handsome while in-game, but here, he has a frigging pear where his head should be. Also, let's talk about Rosie's role in... whatever. Anyway, enough nitpicking. Now let's get back to the gameplay. When I first played this game, I enjoyed the story mode, plowing through enemies and whatnot, but when I hear other people review this game, they all tend to share a sentiment that surprised me. They only like this game for the swinging. They say that's the only good part of it. The missions, the cutscenes, all that stuff they just want to skip because they find it boring and just want to swing all the time. And you know what, I get that. The swinging mechanics are what define this game. It's Spider-Man's equivalent of the rolling mechanics and momentum-based physics of the classic Sonic games. It is what makes this game special. I don't mind the story mode though, I don't find it boring. Some of you may be on the fence about this game because you've heard so many other people say that swinging is the only fun thing about this game and everything else is just worthless padding that may not be worth enduring for the chance to swing around again. But that's not how I feel about it at all. And that may not matter to some of you, but I'm just trying to offer a different perspective here. Swinging is fantastic, but I don't just want to do the same thing in a game endlessly. I want to find something else to do. I want to feel like I'm making progress towards a goal. I can see the beauty in just having fun exploring without end, but there needs to be a sense of purpose. Anyway, there's still plenty of content outside the context of the story to entertain yourself with. You can participate in a race against the clock, dancing around the city to prove your skills. You can stop crimes in progress to prove your heroics. You can save balloons and bring them to kids who more often than not will say anything but thank you.
My balloon is back!
Let's talk about the controls. Combat feels great. It's simple, but it's far more intuitive than in games like Spider-Man 3. We'll get to that. And you really get the feeling that you're just chomping huge chunks out of the baddies when you hit them. That's oh so satisfying and empowering. It's not just a piss-easy button masher though. You really don't have that much health to spare, so making a measly few slip-ups is all it takes to get yourself killed. It's kinda like playing rock, paper, scissors. Read your enemy's movements and beat them mercilessly once you have an opening, cause they won't treat you any differently. Bosses, on the other hand, they're pretty fun and basically just more powerful versions of the enemies you're already fighting, though more explosive despite playing with the same core principles in mind. It's alright. Doc Ock, though, the fights with him aren't bad, and once you get in there long enough to finish a combo or three, you're set, but he spams you with his tentacles so many times you're basically mashing the dodge button as Spidey's head flares up like a strobe light. It's not bad, just kind of exhausting and dumb. It's okay. You can jump to reach varying heights based on how long you build up a yellow charge meter. When it's filled all the way, you can leap several stories off the ground, or you can just hold down a sprint button to hurl yourself forward through the air instead of straight up. Sometimes you can get around just by leaping from rooftop to rooftop. Also, while you're swinging, charging and releasing your jump at the end of a swing will give you some great hang time, and is a good way to launch yourself a little higher if need be. You can even jump when crawling on walls. If you're clinging to a wall and jump when not moving otherwise, you'll just launch yourself away from the side of the building, but if you're scaling a wall, you'll launch yourself further along the wall's surface, eventually falling back into it and clinging to it. There is no logical explanation for Spidey apparently having been magnetized to an intended wall. It's like Mega Man X's wall jump taken to the extreme, but hey, I can't complain about a trick that is admittedly extremely helpful. But hey, I know what you all want to hear me talking about. You want to hear about how awesome swinging is. Swinging is, well, it's all about weight. You don't just hold down a button and watch Spidey float along across the city. You shoot a web and you fiddle around with it. I mean, you can use a joystick to change the direction you're swinging in, which is a given of course, but only so much. It's also important to time your swings just right. For example, shooting out a web just as you're rounding the corner of a building may make you swerve around it, and there you go, now you're swinging sideways, and it's like swerving around in a car, only it flies. Heck, if you can pull this off only to shoot a web at a building in the opposite direction, you'll be yanked that way and flung like you just shot yourself out of a giant slingshot. It sounds silly and pointless, but it's fun! You can also accelerate while swinging, and depending on how far along your swing you do this, it can change where your swing will throw you. It's an incredibly simple system with very rigid rules. I mean, you gotta do things in a way that at least kinda sorta makes sense. But once you learn to do this, there's all sorts of crazy possibilities because it's so acute that just changing your trajectory or velocity or momentum or anything, even slightly, can make a huge difference when caught in a time crunch, or even when you just want to see Spidey do crazy, cool, seemingly impossible things. I can't just show you clips to do this justice. You have to play it for yourself and fiddle around with the swinging mechanics to even remotely appreciate it. I've played it many times over the years, and even now, I can only barely start to fathom the depth of Spider-Man 2's magic. The game, not the movie, though the movie's awesome too. The soundtrack is great. I feel bad for glancing over the soundtrack of the previous game because it's a really good soundtrack and I didn't do it justice at all. So yeah, there's some gaming injustice on my part right there, derp. Well, I won't make the same mistake here. This soundtrack is very different, and to be blunt, it's all over the place. But it's good. Well, okay, most of the soundtrack is really good. I mean, keep in mind, most of the tunes you're hearing throughout this video are from the same game, from one game. There's always something wildly new and different to hear around the corner. But whatever type of music is used in this level or that level, it works. It's all about living in the moment and all that jazz. Jazz. Before we move on to Ultimate Spider-Man, and trust me, I know this review is already way too long as it is, I want to recount what has become one of my fondest memories of this game. One aspect of it that truly makes it stand out to me as something special. No, it's not the crotch shot. Behold, Black Cat. I really like this portrayal of her. She really does add a lot to the story, but not just in cutscenes and not even just in gameplay. It's something deeper. Let me explain. Several times you'll seemingly take a break from the actual plot and the game itself to chase Felicia around for a while. The first couple of times she's just trying to get away from you, but she eventually grows more fond of Spidey and they start to have a lot of fun prancing along the rooftops together. After a while, it's no longer about hunting down a potential enemy or crook, they're just playing cat and mouse. Which one's supposed to be the cat again? These chases have a much more lighthearted tone than most of the chase scenes in other Spidey games, and it's more about simply establishing a connection to this character than anything else. The best way this is conveyed is through the music. The first time you encounter Cat, the music is barely even there. It's just a few soft beats without much else going on, and it sounds tense, like, who is this? It conveys that you don't know this person yet, at all. But little by little, the music changes each time you meet her. As the two become friendlier with each other, the mood of this tune changes. It's still the same tune, but they keep adding new beats to it to make it more bouncy and spirited and alive. The last few chases are where you really get the feeling these two have really become friends, and the music goes all out in peaks. It all culminates with a race with Cat, now a fully established ally. It doesn't even matter if you lose the race. It's not like you have to win in order to progress along the story. You're just playing around having a good time. These two don't even need to express their relationship through dialogue. The music says it all. I know I've been rambling about this one part of the game for a while now, but this really is just so cool and unique. Rarely do I see anything like this happen nowadays in today's uninspired games. Rarely do I see characters conveyed through such simple means as gameplay and music that complement each other. Subtle theming like this is a lost art, and it's just another thing that makes Spider-Man 2 so great. So yeah, it's a fantastic game, big whoop, we already knew that. I'll save my more personal, in-depth thoughts for the end of the video, but really, there's just so many things to love this game for, so many things to love about it, it's just so good. Now let's take a look at Ultimate Spider-Man. Okay, so this game picks up months after the end of Volume 6 of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which are way better than that stupid asinine Avengers toy commercial of the same name. If you want to know what I think of that piece of shit, watch Samuel 24842's review, as his thoughts on the series are pretty much synonymous with my own. So yeah, another shout out. Seriously, go watch his stuff, it's amazing. Anyway, back to the game. The graphics are a pretty big step up from those of Spider-Man 2, and the art style complements them well. Some cutscenes are still more than a little jarring in terms of animation, but the actual graphics make them easier to sit through. There are some serious draw distance pop-up issues though, and they're much more noticeable here than in Spider-Man 2. I guess it's just a result of the game being so much more colorful and cartoony and whacked out. The music is very good, ranging from mellow to exciting to downright haunting, but what can you expect from the guy who composed this? The final boss music in particular is amazing. The voice acting is also fantastic. Well, some roles are hit and miss, but good lord, I just can't get enough of this take of Peter. Who would think the voice of Mac from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends would pull this off so well? I mean, sure, it's a little nasally and condescending. Okay, he's really condescending, but it's appropriate for this more childish take on Spidey, so I'm willing to forgive it. His monologues are also much more true to the spirit of Spider-Man. He constantly takes potshots at baddies in the heat of the moment, which is basically his way of coping with whatever chaotic things are going on around him. And some may feel it's overdone, but I just can't get enough of this. He has this really biting edge that admittedly makes him seem a bit self-indulgent, but the delivery of these lines is priceless and I love it. He's just such a distinct character. Looking at what's happened recently, yeah, I miss the days of this Spider-Man. Back in the day when this game was new, I couldn't imagine what would come to pass years later. Then again, he's not the only Spider-Man to be mercilessly screwed over, though definitely the most eloquently. As for this game's story, I'm not going to spoil much, but there are a few things that I want to say about it. While some of the writing is really good, as could be expected considering how great the comics are, and this is written by the same people, some of the writing is really bad. I guess they just weren't prepared to write the script for a video game. I guess it's also because these cutscenes are usually over too quickly for the dialogue to flow more like a real conversation and feel natural, which was the greatest strength of these comics. The plot often took a backseat to simple character interaction, a luxury this game just doesn't have, so of course the story more often than not feels rushed and jittery. I get it that the writers just didn't want to drag it on, and some scenes do work for the best because of its pacing, but more of them just don't do it for me. I mean, some lines are truly awful. Most of the other characters' roles are pretty frivolous, but I really do like the dynamic between Peter and Eddie, aka Venom. And while some elements are honestly kinda lame, the climax is so epic, it's just one of my favorite final bosses in anything. No, I'm serious. It's much more fun and memorable than the duels with Doc Ock ever were. This game begins lighthearted enough, and you swing around as Spider-Man much like you would in Spider-Man 2. But after a little while you take a nap and cut to none other than Venom, who has his own controls and feels like the Hulk more than Spider-Man. The focus of this gameplay is simply to plow through endless hordes of enemies until you meet a quota and move on. With militarized forces constantly firing at you, the ability to gobble people up, suck the life out of them, and shit them back out comes in really handy. These bits are a fun little change of pace. I mean, they're not the werehog of this game, but thankfully, they don't eat up much of the game. Most of the game is still spent with Spidey. His gameplay is similar to that of Spider-Man 2, but there are some small yet extremely efficient innovations. While Venom can charge his jumps just like he could in Spider-Man 2, Spidey himself doesn't do this anymore. Now he has a double jump, which doesn't necessarily send you that high, but it does add a lot of hang time when swinging around depending on when you time it. The fighting mechanics have been changed quite a bit. It's much more simplified in terms of how many moves you can pull off now, but they're so versatile and situational that you can pull them off in many different ways. It's like a tree trunk being the initial button press, and the possible results being branches that splay out in all directions. For example, let's say you're cornered in an alleyway. Pressing an attack button while near a wall will cause you to bounce off of it and dive right into an enemy real hard. It's a really efficient combat system with a lot of range. Also, while there are only 2 attack buttons, alternating between the 2 gives you different combos, which doesn't sound that impressive, but it's so easy to pull these off, it just plays like a dream. Though I described the combat in Spider-Man 2 feeling like biting big chunks out of an enemy, here you feel more like a scalpel, delicately slicing through them quickly and cleanly, which is more appropriate for this younger, smaller, and more wiry and limber Spider-Man. Interestingly, you don't actually kill any enemies. Though if one falls off a building, I guess they do kinda die since you don't have to web them up. See, in this game, once an enemy's health runs out, they lie down stunned for a bit. You need to web them up, and fast, otherwise they'll just get back up ad infinitum. Seriously, they'll just keep getting back up again and again and again. You have to pin them down. I like to put these guys in the red together, then just collab them all at once and web them all up in the span of a few seconds. The boss battles and chases are mostly tons of fun. To get this point across, let's compare each game's boss battle with Rhino.
I'm gonna smash you good!
This was a bad idea.
The main scary thing about this is the cars. Oh boy. If you can hit these cars into you, you're screwed. Let me just say that. You are honestly screwed.
Heck, just the build-up to the confrontation with Rhino is brilliant. Yeah, it's basically a tutorial disguised as an actual level, but they pull it off so well and in so little time, you just slide into the groove of things with hardly any trouble whatsoever, and the payoff of the actual fight is fun as hell. There are a few bad apples though, mainly the infamous Electro chase and the Green Goblin fight. People hate these. The Electro chase is pretty unforgiving, especially since you haven't had that much time to experience Venom's gameplay style. But as nervous as it always makes me, I still somehow find myself usually beating it on the first try when revisiting the game. So while it's incredibly unnerving, just be careful and don't give up. If you fall down or something, don't panic. You can still win. The Green Goblin chase is fun, but the battle that follows is just so repetitive and it takes so long. I never beat this guy on the first attempt. Some elements from Spider-Man 2 return here. Races, random events, the works. There are also combat tours which just involve taking out entire gangs of baddies. Two little things that may be an issue for some people are the number of things you need to do for the story to progress, but it was never a big issue for me. In fact, usually the story just proceeds automatically because I find myself already having collected enough tokens, beaten enough courses, and saved enough civilians on my way. I mean, this is something we had to deal with in Spider-Man 2, but here it just seems a little easier to deal with. The other issue some may have is its length. This is actually a very short game, over much more quickly than Spider-Man 2, which was never really apparent to me until I replayed them recently for this retrospective. Still, that doesn't mean Ultimate Spider-Man is lacking in content or not worth the price point. It's fairly short, but sweet, and it certainly has replay value. Now for the swinging. Sad to say, the physics of swinging don't seem quite as deep or advanced as before, but it more than makes up with that with the new mechanics added. They're simple tricks, but they really do add a lot. For one thing, the web zip is much more abusable now, and there's one trick in particular that I just love this game for. You can climb up a strand of web while you're swinging. Sure, you can boost along a swing like in Spider-Man 2, but I find climbing to feel much more effective and freeing. Thanks to this simple but unique ability, you can make a constant, steady ascent as you swing along. It isn't necessarily the fastest way to swing around, but it's just so fun. This is one of the coolest things you can do in any Spider-Man game. Sure, it may not seem like such a big deal, but it completely changes the way you travel, so it does go a long way to change the experience. This, along with web zipping, double jumping, and the actual physics of swinging in this game, go a long way to give it a very different feel than Spider-Man 2. You feel so weightless and free, like nothing can keep you down as you soar among the skyscrapers. This is how I think Spider-Man should feel. So, now for the final verdict. So, just what injustice is there? I know I've been singing the praises of Ultimate Spider-Man for a while now, and I know you're thinking that I'm just here to say, oh, Ultimate Spider-Man is better than Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 isn't all that, and, well, actually, you're right. I'm sorry to say, there are some small problems I have with Spider-Man 2. They aren't big issues, but they're there. For example, there have been times when I climb onto a rooftop only to have the sudden camera shift make me lose control of Spidey as I waltz off the rooftop I just climbed onto. It's not the only issue I have, and it may seem kinda nitpicky, but it's the little things like this that aren't an issue in Ultimate Spider-Man, so naturally I see it as an improvement. While this gameplay is a little more simplified, I just think it's pulled off with more finesse. Spider-Man 2 is amazing, and it laid the groundwork for games like this, but the key thing to note here is that it was their first try at making a game with this playstyle, and this is an excellent refinement to that. So you know what, let's make a comparison. Let's look at it like this: Spider-Man 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, Ultimate Spider-Man, Super Mario World. See? I'm not going to say Spider-Man 2 is the best Spider-Man game just because everyone else considers it to be common knowledge, as timeless as this game is. I'm not going to pander to people's nostalgia for this game when they probably haven't even played it in like 5 years. I'm not giving Spider-Man 2 mercy points to be nice to it. I still view Ultimate Spider-Man as the better game, even if just by a little bit. The new tweaks and fun, liberating mechanics just make me love this game more. However, there is yet more injustice to shed light on. As I said earlier in the review, people only seem to love Spider-Man 2 for the swinging and nothing else, and that's really selling it short. It's just a reasonably good game overall and a great experience from beginning to end, with the swinging being the highlight of it. So yeah, don't get the idea that I'm just shitting all over this splendiferous gem of a game. They're both great games, I just, Ultimate Spider-Man, it's the Ultimate Spider-Man game. Well, sorry if I pissed some of you guys off, but there's more pissing off to do. Next time we're going to take a gander at Spider-Man 3 and Web of Shadows, following it up with the Amazing Spider-Man. I'll try not to take too long to finish the next video, but keep in mind, you're basically getting 2 reviews at a time. Doodles!